The beeping was relentless, a mechanical heartbeat that echoed through the sterile hospital room. My vision blurred at the edges, the fluorescent lights above creating halos that seemed to pulse with each labored breath I took. The smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils, mixing with something darker, something that spoke of fear and desperation. Through the fog of medication, I heard his voice, my husband Greg's voice, low and urgent near the doorway. "How much longer do you think she has?" The words cut through the haze like a blade through silk. Sarah, the young nurse with kind eyes who had been checking my vitals, froze. I watched her face transform from professional concern to something else, something that looked like horror. Greg continued, oblivious to her reaction, his voice taking on an almost casual tone that made my blood run cold despite the fever burning through me. "I mean, if she doesn't make it, when would that be? Days? Weeks?" My fingers found the edge of Sarah's sleeve as she leaned closer to adjust my IV. She looked down at me, and in that moment, I knew she understood. I had been preparing for this, hoping I was wrong, praying my instincts were paranoid delusions brought on by illness. But here it was, the confirmation I had dreaded. With trembling hands, I pressed a small piece of paper into her palm. She glanced at it quickly, her eyes widening as she read the code I had written 3 days ago, when my suspicions first crystallized into certainty. The note was simple, coded in a way only someone who understood would recognize. 3 words: "Check Marcus Chen." Below that, a phone number, and at the bottom, the word that made everything real: poisoning. She gave the slightest nod, squeezed my hand once, and left the room with purpose in her stride. Greg approached my bed, his face arranged in an expression of tender concern that now looked grotesque, like a mask that no longer fit properly. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I closed my eyes, pretending the medication had pulled me under. Through my lashes, I watched him settle into the chair beside my bed. He reached for my hand, and I had to suppress a shudder at his touch. The hand that had held mine at our wedding. The hand that had, according to Marcus Chen's investigation, been slowly poisoning me for the past 6 weeks. Minutes later, I heard new voices in the hallway, authoritative and sharp. The metallic click of handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months to when my life still made sense, when I still believed in the fairy tale I had been living. 3 months earlier, Manhattan was dressed in early autumn glory, the trees in Central Park just beginning to turn gold and crimson. I was 62 years old, recently retired from 35 years of teaching elementary school in the Bronx, and I thought I had finally earned my peace. My apartment on the Upper West Side was small but charming, filled with books and the artwork of former students. Greg and I had been married for 12 years, a second marriage for both of us, and I counted myself lucky to have found love again after my first husband passed away from cancer. Greg was a financial consultant, or so he called himself. He worked from home mostly, always on calls, always managing other people's money. He was charming, attentive in public, and had swept me off my feet at a mutual friend's dinner party with his stories of travel and his apparent interest in my teaching career. My children from my first marriage, David and Lauren, had been cautiously supportive, though Lauren had once mentioned that Greg seemed too smooth, whatever that meant. I remember that conversation with Lauren years ago now, before Greg and I got married. We had been having lunch at a bistro in the West Village, the kind of place where the tables were so close you could hear everyone's conversations. Lauren had stirred her coffee for what seemed like an eternity before speaking. "Mom, I just want you to be careful. I know you're happy and I want that for you. But something about Greg feels rehearsed, you know? Like he's playing a part." I had laughed it off, told her she was being overprotective. "Honey, he's just polished. He works with high-net-worth clients. He needs to be professional." But she had looked at me with those eyes so much like her father's, serious and unwavering. "It's not that. It's the way he talks about your money. He always seems to know exactly how much you have, what your accounts are worth, when your pension deposits hit. Dad never talked about money that way. I had changed the subject, but her words had lingered in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. I had a comfortable nest egg, built carefully over decades of careful saving and smart investments. My late husband had left me well provided for, and I had grown that inheritance with patient, conservative choices. Greg knew this, of course. We had discussed it when we decided to marry, and he had insisted we keep separate accounts, which at the time seemed respectful of my independence. Looking back, I can see the manipulation in that choice, the way it gave him distance from my wealth while he plotted to claim it. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was making coffee, the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, when my phone chimed with an alert from the bank. A withdrawal of $50,000 from our joint household account. We kept that account for shared expenses, and it typically held around $10,000 at any given time. I had transferred extra money there the week before for some planned renovations Greg had suggested for the apartment. My hand shook as I held the phone, coffee forgotten. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too bright. I read the notification 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. But no, there it was. 50, Aonun, Thorler's withdrawal, authorized by Gregory Lawson. Greg walked in, already dressed for the day in one of his expensive suits, his silver hair perfectly combed. He kissed my cheek absently, reaching for the coffee pot. His cologne filled the air between us, the same scent he always wore, but today it seemed cloying, overwhelming. "Greg, did you take $50,000 from the joint account?" He didn't even pause in pouring his coffee. "Oh, that. Yes, sweetheart. It's a surprise for our anniversary next month. You know I like to do things in style." The explanation was smooth, practiced almost. But something in my chest tightened. Our anniversary was 6 weeks away. What kind of surprise cost $50,000? I wanted to press him, but he was already moving toward his office, phone pressed to his ear, another call already underway. I stood there in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling behind me, and felt the first tremor of doubt. It was small, barely perceptible, like the distant rumble before an earthquake. I tried to shake it off, went about my day, met my friend Dorothy for our weekly coffee at the cafe near Lincoln Center. But I couldn't quite focus on our conversation. Dorothy was telling me about her grandson's college applications, and I kept nodding at what I hoped were appropriate moments, my mind elsewhere. She noticed, of course. Dorothy had taught 3rd grade for 30 years. She could read a room better than most therapists. "Maggie, you're not here today. What's going on?" I almost told her. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or fear that speaking it aloud would make it real. So I smiled, made an excuse about not sleeping well, and changed the subject. "I know what you're thinking. You're screaming at me through time and space to wake up, to see what was right in front of me. But love isn't blind. It's something worse. It's willing. It's hopeful. It's desperate to believe in the goodness of the person who shares your bed and your coffee maker and your dreams for the future." The second crack came a week later. My friend Dorothy called, her voice strained and uncomfortable in a way I had never heard before. Dorothy and I had taught together for 20 years, had shared everything from classroom disasters to family celebrations. We met for coffee every Thursday at our favorite cafe near Lincoln Center. "Maggie, I don't know how to say this, but I can't make our coffee dates for a while. Things are they're complicated right now." "What's wrong? Is it Tom? The kids?" A long pause stretched between us. "No, everyone's fine. I need some space. I hope you understand." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in the middle of my living room, confusion twisting in my gut like a living thing. Dorothy and I didn't do space. We did honesty and loyalty and 30 years of friendship that had survived teaching reforms, budget cuts, and the general insanity of managing classrooms full of 7-year-olds. I called her back immediately. It went to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, And again that evening. Nothing. It was as if 30 years of friendship had evaporated overnight, leaving me bewildered and hurt in equal measure. That night, I sat at the dining room table, staring at my phone, replaying our last few conversations in my mind. Had I said something offensive? Had I forgotten some important event in her life? I came up empty. Our last coffee date had been perfectly normal, talking about her daughter's promotion and my plans to volunteer at the literacy center. Greg found me there, still sitting in the dark, the dinner I had meant to cook forgotten. He flipped on the light, making me wince. "Maggie? What are you doing sitting here in the dark?" "Dorothy doesn't want to see me anymore." He came over, put his hands on my shoulders. "What happened?" "I don't know. She just called and said she needed space after 30 years. He was quiet for a moment, his hands warm and steady on my shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, sympathetic. "You know, friendships change sometimes. People grow apart. Maybe she's going through something she doesn't want to share." It made sense when he said it, but later, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Dorothy would have told me if she was struggling. That's what we did. We showed up for each other. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Jane canceled our book club with a vague excuse about family commitments. Robert and Patricia, who had been to dinner at our place just last month, stopped returning my calls. I felt like I was watching my social circle dissolve, like I was becoming invisible. Each disconnection felt like a small death. Jane and I had been in the same book club for 15 years. We had read everything from Toni Morrison to Elena Ferrante together, had heated debates about characters and themes over wine and cheese. The last time I saw her, she had been animated and engaged, arguing passionately about the ending of our current read. When she canceled, her email was brief and impersonal. "Hi, Maggie. I won't be able to make book club for the foreseeable future. Personal reasons. Hope you understand." I didn't understand. I emailed back, asking if everything was okay, if there was anything I could do. The response, when it came 2 days later, was even more terse. "Everything's fine. Just need to step back for a while." Robert and Patricia were worse. They had been friends with my late husband and me for decades. We had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, holidays together. Our children had grown up together. When I tried calling, Patricia's phone went straight to voicemail. Robert's rang and rang, but he never picked up. I drove to their apartment in Brooklyn one Saturday afternoon, desperate for answers. I stood outside their building, finger hovering over the buzzer, until I saw Patricia leaving with grocery bags. She saw me, and I watched her face go through a complicated series of expressions. Surprise, guilt, something that looked almost like fear. "Maggie, what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. "I thought I'd stop by. It's been a while since we talked." She shifted the grocery bags in her arms, not meeting my eyes. "This isn't a good time. I have frozen things, and Robert isn't feeling well." "Is everything okay? Have I done something to upset you?" No, nothing like that." She was backing toward the building entrance. "I'm sorry, I really need to go. These bags are heavy." And she was gone, disappeared into her building, leaving me standing on the sidewalk feeling foolish and confused. I walked back to my car in a daze. What was happening? How had I become persona non grata in my own social circle? Greg noticed my distress, of course. He was solicitous, bringing me flowers, suggesting we take a trip to Vermont to see the fall foliage. But when I mentioned my friends pulling away, his response chilled me in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. "Maybe they're just busy, Maggie, or maybe they're jealous. You did just retire with that nice pension and all your investments. People can be strange about money." The way he said it, casual and dismissive, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded almost like satisfaction. I replayed that conversation in my mind for days, turning it over like a stone you find in your shoe, trying to understand why it bothered me so much. It was the satisfaction in his voice, the subtle pleasure, as if my isolation was somehow gratifying to him. But I pushed that thought away, told myself I was being paranoid, projecting my hurt onto him. Then came the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Thursday evening. Greg thought I was in the bath. I had been, but I had gotten out early, wrapped in my robe, padding quietly toward the bedroom to grab my book. His office door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly into the hallway. "No, we need it done before she changes her will. The current version leaves everything to me, but you know how women get at this age. They start thinking about legacies and grandchildren and rewriting everything." My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that wanted to escape. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I backed away from the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub, shaking, trying to process what I had just heard. The bathroom tiles felt cold beneath my bare feet. I could hear the water dripping from the faucet, each drop loud in the silence. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, shocked, like a stranger. I counted the drops, trying to calm my racing heart. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by it? What needed to be done before I changed my will? There had to be an explanation. There had to be something I was missing. Greg loved me. We had built a life together. This had to be about something else, some business deal, some client of his. But even as I tried to rationalize it, a cold certainty was settling into my bones like winter frost. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard him go downstairs. Then I crept to the bedroom, got dressed with shaking hands, and tried to compose my face into something normal. When I finally went downstairs, he was in the kitchen, making dinner, humming to himself. "Feel better after your bath?" "Yes," I managed. "Much better." I confronted him after dinner, my voice remarkably steady considering the storm raging inside me. "Greg, I need to ask you something. That phone call earlier, about a will?" His face transformed in an instant, from relaxed to alert, but then he laughed. That easy, charming laugh that had won me over at that dinner party all those years ago. He stood, crossed to where I sat on the couch, and pulled me into his arms. "Oh, sweetheart, you worry too much. That was about a client, an elderly woman who keeps changing her estate plan every other week. It's driving her family crazy." He kissed the top of my head. "You're imagining things, Maggie. Maybe retirement is giving you too much time to worry." He held me close, and I let him, but his embrace felt wrong now, like being held by a stranger wearing a Greg costume. His heartbeat against my ear was steady, calm. The heartbeat of someone telling the truth, or of someone who was an excellent liar. That night, lying beside him in our bed, listening to his steady breathing, I made a decision. I would not confront him again until I had proof. I would not be dismissed or gaslit or made to feel crazy. I would investigate, and I would find the truth, whatever it cost me. I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I would jerk awake, my mind spinning with possibilities. At 3 a.m, I got up quietly, went to my laptop in the living room, and started searching. How to tell if your spouse is planning to harm you. Financial elder abuse. Signs your partner is after your money. The articles I found were terrifying. They described patterns that felt sickeningly familiar. Isolation from friends and family, controlling behavior, unusual interest in finances, talks of inheritance. One article mentioned that poisoning was more common than people thought, especially with older spouses. Poisoning. The word sent ice through my veins. But no, that was too dramatic. This was real life, not some thriller novel. Greg might be after my money, but surely not. I closed the laptop, went back to bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, I called my daughter Lauren. She was a lawyer in Boston, sharp and skeptical in ways I had never been. When I told her about the withdrawn money and Greg's explanation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mom, that's a lot of money for a surprise. Have you checked the account since then? Any other unusual activity? I hadn't. I spent the next hour on my laptop, going through 3 months of bank statements with attention to detail that would have impressed my most meticulous third graders. What I found made my blood run cold. Small withdrawals, 500 here, 1,000 there, always just under the threshold that would trigger an alert. They added up to nearly $20,000 in total. How had I not noticed? But I knew how. I had been coasting, enjoying retirement, trusting my husband to handle the household finances. I had been lazy, complacent, foolish. I made a spreadsheet, documenting every withdrawal with dates and amounts. The pattern was clear once I laid it out visually. The withdrawals had started about 8 months ago, small at first, then gradually increasing. Always on days when I had appointments or plans that would keep me away from home. Always carefully timed to avoid detection. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I saved the spreadsheet with a password Greg wouldn't guess, then called Lauren back. "There's more," I told her. "Much more." I heard her take a sharp breath. "How much?" "Almost 20,000 in small withdrawals over 8 months, plus the 50,000 from last week. Mom, you need to protect yourself. Have you changed your will recently?" "No. Why?" "Change it, today, if possible, and talk to your bank about freezing Greg's access to the joint account." "I can't just do that. He'll know something's wrong. He'll what, Mom?" Her voice was sharp now, the lawyer voice she used in court. "What are you afraid he'll do?" That stopped me. What was I afraid of? That Greg would be angry, that he would leave, or something worse? Because I trusted him. Because I believed in the story of our marriage. Because at 62, you want to believe you finally found your happy ending, not that you're living with a predator. That's the thing about betrayal at this stage of life. You don't have the resilience of youth, the sense that you have endless time to rebuild. Every loss feels more permanent, every deception more devastating. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever felt like the ground beneath your feet was turning to quicksand and no one else could see it happening? I didn't tell Lauren everything. Not yet. But I did ask her to recommend a private investigator. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the worry in her voice when she finally spoke. "Mom, if you need an investigator, this is serious. Whatever you find out, we're here for you. David and we've got your back." Her words made me want to cry. I had been feeling so alone, so isolated. Knowing my children were on my side gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, sweetheart. I love you." "I love you too, Mom. Be careful, okay? And call me every day. I want to know you're safe." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the family photos on the wall. My late husband and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful. David and Lauren as children, gap-toothed and grinning. My parents, long gone now. And then the more recent photos, Greg and me at various events, always smiling, always looking happy. How many of those smiles had been real? How long had he been planning this? The investigator's name was Marcus Chen, a former NYPD detective who now ran a small agency specializing in financial crimes and infidelity cases. His office was in Midtown, a modest space with file cabinets and a coffee maker that looked like it had survived several decades. He listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a small leather notebook. Marcus was in his late 50s, I guessed, with graying hair cut military short and eyes that missed nothing. His office was sparse but organized, with diplomas on the wall and commendations from his police days. A photo on his desk showed him with a woman and 2 teenagers, all smiling at a baseball game. When I finished talking, he was quiet for a moment, reviewing his notes. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm going to be direct with you. What you're describing fits a pattern I've seen before. Men who marry women with assets, isolate them socially, and then position themselves to inherit. Usually there's more to it, sometimes an affair, sometimes gambling debts, sometimes just pure greed." He flipped back through his notebook. The social isolation is particularly concerning. You said all your friends pulled away at roughly the same time? Within about 2 weeks, yes. That's not coincidental. Someone said something to them, spread some kind of story that made them uncomfortable being around you. But what could he possibly say that would make lifelong friends abandon me? Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. In cases like this, it's usually something embarrassing or concerning. Maybe he told them you're developing dementia, or that you've become paranoid and accusatory. Something that would make them want to give you space while simultaneously making any concerns you might raise seem like symptoms of mental instability. The room tilted slightly. Of course, it was brilliant and horrible at the same time. If I tried to tell anyone Greg was stealing from me or plotting against me, they would think it was the dementia talking or the paranoia. He had inoculated them against believing me. How do we prove it? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice was. I'll need to investigate Greg's background, his financial situation, his activities. I'll also need to talk to some of your friends, see what they were told. But Mrs. Lawson, I need you to be prepared for what we might find. In my experience, when someone goes to this much trouble, they're planning something big. Like what? He met my eyes directly. Like making sure you don't live long enough to change that will. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and terrifying. I thought about all the meals Greg had cooked for me lately, his sudden interest in making me special smoothies in the morning, the vitamins he insisted I take. You think he might try to? I couldn't finish the sentence. I think we need to consider all possibilities. Have you had any health issues lately? Anything unusual? I thought back. I've been more tired than usual, occasional dizziness. My doctor said it was probably just age, adjusting to retirement. Marcus wrote something in his notebook. I want you to go to a different doctor, someone Greg doesn't know about. Get a complete blood panel, test for toxins, and be very careful about what you eat and drink at home. When possible, prepare your own meals, keep your food and drinks where he can't access them. The paranoia of it was overwhelming, but I nodded, making mental notes. I was living in a spy novel, except this was my life, my marriage, my survival. How long will the investigation take? Depends on what I find. Could be a week, could be a month. I'll start with his background check and financial records. I have contacts who can access things that aren't public record. In the meantime, you need to act normal. Don't let him know you suspect anything. Can you do that? Could I? Could I sit across the breakfast table from a man who might be poisoning me and pretend everything was fine? Could I lie in bed beside him and pretend to sleep? Yes, I said. I can do that. I paid Marcus his retainer in cash, money I had withdrawn from a personal account Greg didn't know about, and left his office feeling both terrified and oddly empowered. At least I was doing something. At least I wasn't a passive victim. On the subway ride home, I watched the other passengers and wondered if any of them were hiding secrets like mine. The woman with the designer handbag and the wedding ring was her husband. What he seemed? The elderly man reading the newspaper. Did he trust the people around him? We were all just navigating through life, trusting and hoping, and sometimes that trust was misplaced in the most devastating ways. When I got home, Greg was in his office on a call. I could hear his voice, smooth and professional, talking about investment portfolios and risk management. The irony wasn't lost on me. I went to the kitchen and made myself tea, my hands steadier than I expected. While the water boiled, I thought about the next steps. A new doctor, tests, keeping a record of everything I ate and drank, living like a spy in my own home. The kettle whistled, and I poured the water over my tea bag, watching the color bloom through the clear liquid. I had always loved this moment, the transformation of hot water into something comforting and warm. But now, even this simple pleasure was tinged with suspicion. I had made this tea myself, but what about dinner? What about the coffee Greg had made this morning? I dumped the tea down the sink and drank water straight from the bottle instead. That night, I suggested we order takeout instead of cooking. Greg seemed surprised but agreeable. When the food arrived, I watched him carefully as he divided it onto plates, but I saw nothing suspicious. Still, I made sure to serve myself, kept my plate where I could see it at all times. "You're quiet tonight," Greg observed. "Everything okay?" "Just tired. I didn't sleep well last night." "You should take one of those sleeping pills the doctor prescribed." "Maybe. We'll see." There was no way I was taking any medication Greg had access to. I would lie awake every night if I had to, but I wouldn't make myself vulnerable to whatever he might add to my pills. Over the next week, Marcus called with updates. Each call brought new revelations that made my blood run colder. He had run a background check on Greg, and the results were disturbing. Greg's financial consulting business was mostly a facade. He had few actual clients, and most of his income over the past 12 years had come from his previous wife, who had died unexpectedly 2 years into their marriage. Her name was Patricia Morrison, Marcus told me over the phone. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, having invented an errand to get out of the apartment where Greg couldn't overhear. The sky was gray and threatening rain, matching my mood perfectly. She died of what was ruled a heart attack, but there was never an autopsy. She was 58, healthy as far as anyone knew, left everything to Greg in her will, which she had changed 6 months before her death. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, needing something solid to hold on to. "Tell me everything you found." Marcus's voice was grim but thorough. Patricia Morrison was a successful real estate agent in New Jersey. She met Greg at a charity fundraiser 3 years before you met him. By all accounts, it was a whirlwind romance. They married within 6 months. Her friends said Greg was charming, attentive, everything she'd been looking for after her divorce. It was like listening to my own story being told by someone else. The pattern was so clear now, so obvious in hindsight. "What happened to her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be terrible. About 18 months into the marriage, her friends noticed she was pulling away. Sound familiar? She stopped attending their regular get-togethers, stopped taking their calls. When they did see her, she seemed tired, distracted. One friend, a woman named Susan Hartley, told me Patricia had complained about feeling dizzy and nauseous, but Greg kept telling her it was stress from work. I closed my eyes, seeing myself in Patricia. How many times had Greg suggested my symptoms were just stress, just age, just me overreacting? 6 months before she died, Patricia changed her will, Marcus continued. Previously, she had left everything to her 2 adult children from her first marriage, but Greg convinced her to leave it all to him, with the children getting only small amounts. He told her it made sense since they were married, and he could manage the estate better, distribute things to the kids later. "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "The kids never saw a penny." "Correct. After Patricia died, Greg liquidated almost everything within 3 months. The house, the business, the investments. He paid off the kids with about $50,000 each, claiming the estate wasn't worth as much as their mother had thought. Then he disappeared from their lives completely. Did they suspect anything? Susan Hartley did. She called me yesterday after I contacted her. She's been carrying guilt about Patricia's death for years. She said something felt wrong about the whole situation, but she didn't know what to do about it. There was no evidence, no autopsy, and Greg was gone before they could ask more questions. I thought about Susan Hartley, a woman I'd never met, carrying the weight of her friend's death for years. Soon, my own friends might be carrying that same weight if we didn't stop Greg. "There's more," Marcus said. I dug deeper into Greg's history before Patricia. Found another woman, Ellen Chen. This was about 15 years ago, before digital records were as comprehensive. Ellen was a widow, 61 years old, owned a successful import business in California. She and Greg dated for 2 years before getting married. My mouth went dry. Let me guess, she died unexpectedly? Heart failure, supposedly. But here's what's interesting. I tracked down Ellen's personal physician, Dr. Richard Yoon. He's retired now, living in San Diego. I called him yesterday. He remembered Ellen vividly because her death bothered him. Why? Because Ellen had just had a complete physical 2 months before she died. Clean bill of health, strong heart, good vitals, everything. Then suddenly she's dead from heart failure? Dr. Yoon said he wanted to request an autopsy, but Greg was adamant that Ellen wouldn't have wanted it. Religious reasons, he claimed. Dr. Yoon had no authority to overrule the husband, so Ellen was cremated within 48 hours. The pattern was unmistakable now. Greg had been doing this for at least 15 years, probably longer. How many women? How many families left with unanswered questions and lingering guilt? Marcus, how many others do you think there might be? Hard to say. I'm still digging, but based on the gaps in Greg's employment history and financial records, there could be at least 2 or 3 more. Maybe more that are harder to trace. This man has made a career out of marrying vulnerable women and killing them for their money. Vulnerable. Was that what I was? I had thought of myself as independent, capable. But I was vulnerable in the ways that mattered to a predator like Greg. I was alone, recently retired, with a substantial nest egg and no one watching over my shoulder. What do we do with this information? I asked. I'm compiling a full report for the police. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you safe. Have you been careful about what you're eating and drinking? Yes, I've been following your instructions exactly. Good. Because Mrs. Lawson, I need you to understand something. Greg has done this multiple times. He's gotten away with it every time. That makes him both dangerous and confident. He thinks he knows exactly how this plays out. We need to be smarter than he is. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in my car for a long time, watching shoppers push their carts across the parking lot, living their normal lives. I thought about Patricia Morrison and Ellen Chen and the other women whose names I didn't even know yet. They had all trusted Greg. They had all believed in his love. And they had all paid for that trust with their lives. But I wasn't going to be another name on that list. I was going to be the one who stopped him. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. He's going to kill me. Not if we stop him first, but we need proof. Has Greg been doing anything unusual lately? Preparing any food or drink specifically for you? I thought about the smoothies, the special vitamins, the attentive way he had been bringing me coffee in bed. All of it took on a sinister cast. Yes, he's been making me smoothies every morning for the past month, says they're good for my energy. Stop drinking them. In fact, I want you to save one if you can. Bring it to a lab I work with. We can test it. The next morning, when Greg brought me my usual smoothie, I took it with a smile and a thank you. As soon as he left for his client meeting, I poured it into a sealed container and drove it to the address Marcus had given me. The lab technician, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair, took the container without comment. Results in 48 hours, she said. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal life, pretending everything was fine, while my mind raced through endless terrible scenarios. I called my children every day, as I had promised Lauren, though I didn't tell them the full extent of what I had learned. David was in California, wrapped up in his work as a software engineer. Lauren was preparing for a big case. I didn't want to burden them, not yet. Not until I had proof. Meanwhile, I became hypervigilant about everything I consumed. I ate only packaged foods I opened myself, drank only from sealed bottles, prepared my own meals when Greg was out. He noticed. "You're not drinking your smoothies anymore," he commented one morning, his tone carefully neutral. "They were upsetting my stomach," I lied. "I think maybe I'm allergic to something in them." "That's a shame. You seemed to have more energy when you were drinking them." The irony of that statement was staggering. Of course I had less energy. The poison was likely leaving my system. When Marcus called with the lab results, I was alone in the apartment. Greg had gone to the gym, or so he said. I had learned to doubt everything he told me. Mrs. Lawson, the smoothie contained high levels of antifreeze, not enough to kill you in one dose, but over time it would cause organ failure that would look like natural causes. The room spun. I sat down hard on the couch, the phone pressed to my ear. "We have him," Marcus continued. "This is evidence of attempted murder. But we need to be smart about how we proceed. If we go to the police now, he might destroy evidence, or worse, escalate his plans. I recommend we set a trap." "What kind of trap?" "We let him think his plan is working. You start drinking the smoothies again, but we substitute harmless ones. You pretend to get sicker. Meanwhile, we'll have surveillance in place, document everything, and we'll get you somewhere safe before he can make his final move." It was a solid plan, but it required me to be an actress in the most important role of my life. Could I do it? Could I pretend to be dying while the man I had married thought he was successfully murdering me? "Yes," I told Marcus. "Tell me what to do." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I followed Marcus's instructions precisely. I started drinking the smoothies again, the clean ones Marcus's team swapped in early each morning while Greg was in the shower. I began to act tired, weak, occasionally dizzy. Greg's concerns seemed to intensify, which made my skin crawl. He was attentive, loving, the perfect husband watching his wife's health decline. At his suggestion, I went to my doctor, complaining of the symptoms I was faking. Dr. Harrison was concerned, ordered tests. The tests came back showing slightly elevated liver enzymes, nothing dramatic, but worrying enough to warrant monitoring. Greg insisted on coming to all my appointments, holding my hand, asking intelligent questions, playing his part perfectly. Marcus's surveillance team caught it all on camera. Greg's satisfaction when I looked particularly weak. The way he'd bring me vitamins and watch to make sure I took them. The phone calls he made when he thought I was sleeping, talking to someone about just a few more weeks. And then I got sick. Really sick. Not from the smoothies, which Marcus had ensured were clean, but from some kind of flu that was going around. The irony was almost funny. After weeks of faking illness, my body decided to give me the real thing. The fever hit hard and fast. One morning, I woke up feeling like I was on fire, my head pounding, my throat raw. Greg found me trying to get out of bed and failing. "Maggie, you're burning up. I'm calling an ambulance." No, I'll be fine." Just the flu. But I wasn't fine. By that evening, I was delirious, my temperature climbing to dangerous levels. Even through the fog of fever, I knew I needed help. I let Greg call 911. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and sounds, and the paramedic's calm voice asking me questions I could barely comprehend. At the hospital, they admitted me immediately. Severe flu had developed into pneumonia. I was in real danger, but not from Greg's poison. From a random virus that had chosen the worst possible time to attack my system. I drifted in and out of consciousness for the first day. When I was lucid enough to understand what was happening, I asked the nurse, a different one, an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes, to call Marcus Chen. I gave her his number, made her promise to call him immediately. She must have thought I was delirious, but she made the call. When I woke up several hours later, Marcus was standing beside my bed, his face grim. "He's here," Marcus said quietly. "Greg, he's been playing the concerned husband, but Mrs. Lawson, he's asking the doctors about your prognosis. Specifically, whether you're likely to survive." Even sick as I was, the horror of that penetrated. My husband was in this hospital, asking doctors if I was going to die, probably hoping the answer was yes. Probably calculating how much longer he would have to wait for my money. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The police are involved now. We have enough evidence to arrest him. But they want to catch him in the act of something undeniable. They want you to help us." "How?" He explained the plan. It was risky, but it might be our only chance to catch Greg red-handed, to prove beyond any doubt what he was trying to do. I would need to be alert enough to help, which meant I had to get better quickly. The doctors were already pumping me full of antibiotics and antivirals. I was young enough, healthy enough despite everything, that they expected me to turn a corner soon, and I did. By the third day, my fever broke. My mind cleared, and Sarah became my primary nurse. Sarah was young, maybe 27 or 28, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. When Marcus explained the situation to her, in the presence of the hospital's security team and a detective from the NYPD, she didn't hesitate. "I'll help. What do you need me to do?" That's when we came up with the code. A simple note that I would pass to her when the moment was right, with Marcus's phone number and the word that would explain everything. Poisoning. On the fourth day of my hospital stay, I was feeling well enough to sit up, to think clearly, to be afraid. The doctor said I could probably go home in another day or two, which meant we were running out of time. Greg had been there every day, sitting by my bed, holding my hand, all the while asking nurses and doctors about my chances of recovery. And then came the moment I had been dreading and preparing for. That morning when I heard Greg talking to Sarah in that low, urgent voice. "How much longer do you think she has?" I had passed Sarah the note. She had nodded, squeezed my hand, and left to call the police. Now I just had to wait, to keep playing my part for a few more minutes. Greg sat down beside my bed, and I pretended to be asleep, but I could feel him watching me. Through my eyelashes, I saw him check his watch, glance at the door. Was he nervous? Did he suspect something? And then I heard them. The footsteps in the hallway, the authoritative voices. Detective Maria Santos, whom I had met briefly when Marcus brought the police into the investigation, was leading the team. "Gregory Lawson?" Greg stood up quickly, confusion on his face. "Yes? What's going on?" "Mr. Lawson, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Margaret Lawson and for the suspected murder of Patricia Morrison." I watched through barely opened eyes as they read him his rights, as his face went through shock, denial, anger. He looked at me once, and our eyes met. In that moment, I saw the mask finally fall away. There was no love there, no concern, just cold calculation and fury that his plan had been foiled. "She's faking," he spat. "She's been playing you all. There's nothing wrong with her." Detective Santos smiled grimly. "Actually, Mrs. Lawson has been quite ill, flu and pneumonia according to her doctors. But she was well enough to help us catch you asking medical staff about her chances of dying. Combined with the evidence we have of you poisoning her food over the past several weeks, and the new information we've uncovered about your previous wife's death, I'd say we have a strong case." They led him out in handcuffs, and I finally let myself breathe. Sarah came back into the room, her face pale but determined. "Are you okay, Mrs. Lawson?" "I think so. Thank you for believing me, for helping." She sat down in the chair Greg had vacated. "I see a lot in this job, but what he did, what he was trying to do, I couldn't just stand by." Marcus came in shortly after, followed by Lauren and David. My daughter was crying as she hugged me, careful of the IV lines. "Mom, why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have helped." "I needed to be sure, and I didn't want to worry you until I had proof." David, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. "What happens now?" Marcus answered. "The police will build their case. With the poisoned smoothies, the surveillance footage, the evidence about Patricia Morrison's death, and Greg's behavior here at the hospital, they have more than enough for attempted murder. The DA might even bring murder charges for Patricia Morrison if they can exhume the body and find evidence of poisoning." "How long was he planning this?" Lauren asked, her lawyer mind working. "Based on the financial records, probably from before he married your mother. He's done this at least once before, maybe more. We're looking into another woman he was involved with about 15 years ago. She also died suddenly and left him everything. The full horror of it was settling in. I had married a serial killer, a man who made a living marrying women with money and slowly, patiently, murdering them for their assets." "Mom, you're coming to Boston with me," Lauren said firmly. "As soon as the doctors release you. You're not going back to that apartment alone." I didn't argue. The thought of going back to the home I had shared with Greg, knowing what I knew now, was unbearable. I stayed in the hospital for 2 more days, recovering from the pneumonia. During that time, the police investigation expanded. They exhumed Patricia Morrison's body and found high levels of antifreeze in her remains, even after years in the ground. They identified 2 other women Greg had been involved with, both of whom had died under suspicious circumstances. The youngest had been only 53. The media got hold of the story. "Serial husband suspected in deaths of multiple wives" was the headline in the New York Post. My face was all over the news, identified as the woman who had escaped, who had caught her husband in the act. I hated the attention, but Marcus said it might help. Other victims might come forward, other families who had suspected something but never had proof. Greg's lawyer tried to get bail, but the judge denied it. Given the defendant's history and the nature of the charges, I consider him a flight risk and a danger to others. Greg was led away to Rikers Island to await trial. I went home with Lauren to her brownstone in Boston's South End. She set me up in her guest room, surrounded me with books and comfort, and fussed over me like I was a child again. I let her. I needed to be taken care of, to feel safe, to begin processing everything that had happened. The therapy started a week later. Dr. Ellen Rosenberg was a specialist in trauma, recommended by Lauren. In her quiet office with its comfortable chairs and boxes of tissues strategically placed, I began to unpack the layers of betrayal and fear I had been carrying. "You trusted your instincts, Doctor," Rosenberg told me in one of our early sessions. "When something felt wrong, you didn't ignore it. You investigated. That's what saved your life. But I almost didn't. I almost talked myself out of it. I almost believed his excuses. But you didn't. That's what matters. You chose to trust yourself more than you trusted him." It would take months, I knew, to fully process what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just about the poisoning or the theft. It was about every moment of our 12-year marriage that I now had to re-examine through this new, terrible lens. Had any of it been real? Had he ever cared for me at all, or had I been nothing but a mark from the very beginning? The trial was set for 6 months out. The DA's office was meticulous in building their case, adding charge after charge as they uncovered more evidence. Greg would likely spend the rest of his life in prison if convicted. Those 6 months were a strange liminal space, a time of waiting and healing and preparing myself for what was to come. The DA, a sharp woman named Rachel Torres, kept me informed every step of the way. She was building an airtight case, she told me, but she needed me to be ready to testify. "He's going to try to paint you as mentally unstable," Rachel warned me during one of our meetings. "His defense attorney will use your age, your recent retirement, your isolation from friends. They'll try to claim you were paranoid, delusional, that you fabricated this whole thing because you were upset about normal marital disagreements." I sat in her office, a space that was somehow both chaotic and organized, with case files stacked everywhere, but everything seeming to have its place. Through the window, I could see the Manhattan skyline, the city where I had lived most of my adult life, where I had taught children and raised my own children and thought I had found love again. "I can handle it," I told her. "I know the truth. I have the evidence. I'm not afraid of him anymore." And it was true. The fear that had gripped me for months had transformed into something else. Not anger, exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was more like a steely determination. Greg had counted on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to doubt myself. He had miscalculated. Rachel smiled at me, and I could see the respect in her eyes. "Good. Because your testimony is going to be crucial. The jury needs to see you, hear your story directly. They need to understand what he did, how he manipulated you, how close he came to succeeding." We spent hours preparing. Rachel threw every possible question at me, played devil's advocate, forced me to relive the worst moments over and over until I could tell my story without breaking down. It was exhausting and necessary. During one particularly grueling prep session, she asked me about the night I overheard Greg's phone call about the will. When you heard him say those words, what went through your mind? I closed my eyes, bringing myself back to that moment. The cold bathroom tiles under my bare feet, the water dripping from the faucet, the way my reflection in the mirror had looked like a stranger. I thought I was going crazy, I said slowly. I thought maybe retirement had been harder on me than I realized, that I was imagining things, creating problems where there weren't any. Greg was so good at making me doubt myself. But then, underneath all that doubt, there was this tiny voice, my voice, and it was saying, "You know what you heard. You know what it means. Don't let him convince you otherwise." Rachel nodded, making notes. "That's perfect. That's exactly what the jury needs to hear. Hold on to that." In the meantime, I had to rebuild my life. I sold the Upper West Side apartment. I couldn't imagine ever setting foot in it again. The process was painful in unexpected ways. Packing up 12 years of marriage, deciding what to keep and what to donate, finding reminders of Greg in every corner, his coffee cup in the kitchen, his reading glasses on the nightstand, the anniversary card he had given me last year, full of loving words that meant nothing. I kept very little. Most of it I donated or threw away. I kept the things that were mine before him, the photos of my children and grandchildren, the books I had loved, the artwork from my former students. Everything else could go. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Michelle who never once asked me why I was selling, got me a good price. "It's a seller's market," she said, "and this is a lovely apartment in a great location." She didn't know, or didn't let on if she did, that this apartment had been the scene of attempted murder, that poison had been measured out in its kitchen, that a predator had prowled its rooms. I split my time between Lauren's place in Boston and David's in San Francisco, surrounded by my children and grandchildren. Being with my family was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Lauren's teenage daughter, Emma, became particularly attached to me during this time. One evening, we were sitting in Lauren's kitchen, Emma doing her homework while I made tea. She looked up at me with those serious eyes, so much like her mother's. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" Of course, sweetheart." "Were you scared when you found out what Greg was doing?" Lauren, who had been working on her laptop at the other end of the table, looked up sharply. "Emma, you don't have to answer that, Mom. That's not—" But I held up my hand, stopping her. "It's okay." I sat down next to Emma. Yes, I was scared. I was terrified. But you know what I was more scared of? What? Doing nothing, being a victim, letting him win. Sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing are the same thing, and you have to do it anyway. Emma nodded slowly, processing this. "You're really brave, Grandma." "No," I said gently. "I was just a woman who paid attention to that little voice inside that said something was wrong. The bravest thing I did was believe myself." That conversation stayed with me. I thought about all the times in my life I had ignored that inner voice, dismissed my own instincts in favor of being polite, being accommodating, not making waves. How many women did that every day? How many of us had been trained from childhood to doubt ourselves, to defer to others, to smile and nod even when every instinct screamed that something was wrong? David's approach to my recovery was more practical. He set me up with a financial advisor who helped me restructure my accounts, set up new security measures, ensure that no one could access my money without my explicit approval. He taught me about two-factor authentication, password managers, all the digital tools that could help protect me. "Knowledge is power, Mom," he told me as we sat in his home office in San Francisco, the bay spread out below us in the afternoon sun. "The more you understand about protecting yourself, financially, digitally, physically, the safer you'll be." I appreciated his thoroughness, even if it sometimes overwhelmed me. David had always been my practical child, the one who approached problems with logic and systems. It was comforting to let him help me build these new safeguards. But it was during those months that I also had to confront the deeper questions. How had I missed the signs? Why had I ignored Lauren's early warnings about Greg? What did it say about me that I had been so easily isolated from my friends? Dr. Rosenberg helped me work through these questions without falling into the trap of self-blame. "You were a woman who wanted to believe in love," she told me during one session. "That's not a character flaw. That's human." Greg exploited normal human desires, the desire for companionship, for love, for trust. He's a predator who has spent years perfecting his technique. This isn't about you being gullible. It's about him being a calculating sociopath. But even understanding that intellectually, I still struggled emotionally. Late at night, lying in Lauren's guest room or David's spare bedroom, I would replay moments from my marriage to Greg, looking for the signs I had missed, wondering if anything had been real. Had he ever loved me, even a little? Or had I been nothing but a bank account to him from the very first moment? I would never know the answer to that question, and eventually I had to make peace with that uncertainty. My friends started reaching out, one by one, after they learned the truth. Dorothy called first, crying as she apologized. "He told us you had early-stage dementia," she explained. "He said the doctors wanted you to have space, not too much stimulation. He said you had become paranoid and were making accusations against him, and that we needed to give you distance for your own good. I'm so sorry, Maggie. I should have called you directly, should have checked on you." He was very convincing, I told her, and I meant it. He fooled all of us. One by one, my friends came back, bringing their apologies and their horror at what Greg had almost accomplished. We met for coffee, for lunch, for long walks in the park where we talked about trust and betrayal and how we move forward when the ground beneath us has shifted. And slowly, incrementally, I began to heal. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom in downtown Manhattan, flanked by Lauren and David, and watched as the trial that would determine Greg's fate unfolded. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, more intimate. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches for spectators. The jury box to the left, 12 people who would hear my story and decide whether to believe it. Greg sat at the defense table with his attorney, a slick man named Gerald Hutchinson, who wore expensive suits and an expression of perpetual skepticism. I had to testify on the third day of the trial. Rachel Torres had prepared me as best she could, but nothing quite readies you for the moment when you have to stand up in front of strangers and recount the most traumatic experience of your life. "Mrs. Lawson," Rachel began gently, after I had been sworn in, "can you tell the jury about your marriage to the defendant?" I took a deep breath and began. I told them about meeting Greg at that dinner party, about his charm and attentiveness. I told them about our 12 years of marriage, about my retirement, about the moment I first suspected something was wrong. "Can you describe for the jury what happened when you noticed the $50,000 withdrawal from your joint account?" I did. I described every detail I could remember. The morning light in the kitchen, the way my hand shook as I held my phone. Greg's smooth explanation, delivered without a pause in pouring his coffee. "And what did you feel in that moment?" "Doubt," I said honestly. "Self-doubt. I wanted to believe him. I loved him, or I thought I did. But something in my gut said this wasn't right." Rachel walked me through the entire timeline. The friends who pulled away, the overheard phone call, my decision to hire Marcus Chen, the discovery of the poisoned smoothies, every piece of evidence laid out methodically. When it was Hutchinson's turn to cross-examine me, he came out swinging. "Mrs. Lawson, isn't it true that you were struggling with retirement? That you were feeling isolated and lonely?" I was adjusting to retirement, yes, but I wasn't. "Isn't it true that your husband suggested therapy for you because you were becoming paranoid?" "No, that's not—" "Mrs. Lawson," he cut me off, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted your husband's normal concern for your well-being as something sinister? That you, perhaps due to the stress of retirement and age-related changes, created a narrative that simply isn't supported by the facts? I felt my anger rising, but Rachel had prepared me for this. I took a breath and looked directly at Hutchinson. Mr. Hutchinson, there was antifreeze in the smoothies my husband made for me. That's not a misinterpretation. That's attempted murder. A ripple went through the courtroom. Hutchinson's expression flickered for just a moment before he regained his composure. Let's talk about this alleged poisoning. You have no proof that my client was the one who put any substance in those smoothies. He was the only one who had access to them. He made them for me every morning and watched me drink them. Or perhaps you put something in them yourself to support this fantastical story you've concocted. Why would I do that? I don't know, Mrs. Lawson. Why does anyone create false allegations against their spouse? Divorce proceedings can be contentious. Perhaps you wanted a more favorable financial settlement. I didn't want a divorce. I wanted to survive. The cross-examination went on for another hour, Hutchinson trying every angle he could think of to shake my story. But I held firm. I knew the truth. I had the evidence. And most importantly, I had survived. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, my legs were shaking. But I had done it. I had told my story. Over the next week, the prosecution called witness after witness. Marcus Chen testified about his investigation, presenting the surveillance footage of Greg watching me with satisfaction when I appeared weak. The recorded phone calls about just a few more weeks. The lab technician testified about the antifreeze in the smoothies. Sarah, the nurse, testified about Greg asking when I would die. Then came the witnesses about Patricia Morrison and Ellen Chen. Patricia's sister took the stand and broke down crying as she described her suspicions, her guilt at not doing more. Ellen Chen's doctor testified about his concerns regarding her sudden death. Financial experts showed how Greg had systematically drained each woman's accounts after their deaths. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, suggesting that the deaths of Morrison and Chen were coincidental, that I was a scorned wife making up stories. But the mountain of evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict. In the case of the People versus Gregory Lawson, on the count of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of grand larceny in the first degree? Guilty. On the count of murder in the first degree of Patricia Morrison? Guilty. On the count of murder in the first degree of Ellen Chen? Guilty. With each guilty, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. After everything, there was justice. When the verdict was read, Greg showed no emotion. He sat still and straight in his chair, as if this were happening to someone else. But when they led him away, he looked at me one last time. I held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. I would never have to worry about him again. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, Marcus Chen stood beside me as reporters shouted questions. "How does it feel to have survived?" one of them yelled. I thought about that question for a moment before answering. How did it feel? "It feels like I have a second chance at life," I said finally, "and I intend to make the most of it." And I did. I moved back to New York eventually, to a different apartment in a different neighborhood, Greenwich Village this time, a cozy 1-bedroom on a tree-lined street, where I knew no one, and no one knew my story unless I chose to share it. It was a fresh start, a clean slate. The apartment was smaller than my old place, but it was mine in a way the Upper West Side apartment had never been. I decorated it slowly, thoughtfully, choosing each piece of furniture, each painting, each book for the shelf. This was my space, free from the shadow of Greg's presence. I started volunteering at a women's shelter in Brooklyn 3 months after the trial ended. The director, a fierce woman named Carmen Rodriguez, had read about my case in the papers and reached out to me. "We have women here who are going through what you went through," she told me over coffee. "Some of them are being isolated by their partners. Some are being financially controlled. Some are in immediate danger. Your story could help them see that they can fight back, that they can survive." I wasn't sure I was ready. But when I walked into the shelter for the first time and saw the women there, some with children, some alone, all of them carrying the weight of trauma and fear, I knew I had to try. I started leading a weekly support group. We would sit in a circle in a small room painted a calming blue, and I would share my story. Then they would share theirs. The details were different, but the patterns were always the same: isolation, control, gaslighting, the gradual erosion of self-trust. One woman, Maria, was in her 40s with 3 kids. Her husband had convinced her that she was a bad mother, that no one else would want her, that she was lucky he stayed with her despite her failures. He controlled every penny of their money. He read her texts and emails. He told her friends and family that she was mentally unstable. "How did you know to trust yourself?" she asked me one evening, her eyes pleading for an answer that would save her. "How did you know you weren't crazy?" I thought about her question carefully before answering. I didn't always know. There were days I was convinced I was imagining everything. But I kept a journal, wrote down everything that happened, everything he said. When I read it back, I could see the patterns. I could see that my instincts were right. I told them about the small voice inside, the one that whispered something's wrong, even when everything on the surface looked fine. I told them about the importance of documenting everything, of having people you trust, of believing yourself even when everyone else seems to doubt you. "You are the expert on your own life," I would tell them. Trust that expertise. Watching these women find their strength, seeing them make plans to leave, helping them believe they deserved better, it became my purpose. The nightmare I had lived through had meaning now. It could help others survive theirs. I reconnected with my friends, deepened my relationships with my children, watched my grandchildren grow. Dorothy and I resumed our Thursday coffee dates, though now we met at a cafe in the village near my new apartment. Our friendship had been tested, but it had survived, perhaps stronger for having weathered the storm. "I won't ever forgive myself for abandoning you," she told me one afternoon, tears in her eyes. "You didn't abandon me," I said gently. "You were manipulated by a very skilled manipulator. He fooled all of us. But we're here now, and that's what matters." I traveled to places I had always wanted to see: Paris, Rome, the Greek islands. I went with groups of other solo travelers, women mostly, who had their own stories of survival and reinvention. In Paris, I stood beneath the Eiffel Tower and cried, not from sadness, but from the sheer joy of being alive to see it. In Rome, I threw a coin in the Trevi Fountain and made a wish for all the women still trapped in situations like mine. In Santorini, I watched the sunset over the caldera and felt, for the first time in years, completely at peace. I learned to paint, taking classes at a community center near my apartment. I was terrible at first, my hands unused to the brush, my eye unpracticed in seeing light and shadow. But my teacher, a patient man named Thomas, who must have been 80 if he was a day, encouraged me. "Art isn't about perfection," he told me. "It's about expression. What do you want to say?" What did I want to say? I painted the view from my hospital bed, the sterile white ceiling, the IV pole, the window with its slice of gray sky. I painted Sarah's kind eyes. I painted Lauren and David standing beside me. I painted my own hands, wrinkled and age-spotted and strong, holding a brush instead of the note I had given Sarah. I was painting my survival, my reclamation of my own story. I wrote about my experience too, started a blog that I called Trusting the Whisper, about listening to your instincts even when it's scary. I wrote about the warning signs I had missed and the ones I had heeded. I wrote about the manipulation tactics abusers use, about financial control, about isolation. The blog found an audience I hadn't expected. Women from all over the country, all over the world, wrote to me. Some were in situations like mine, trying to figure out if they were paranoid or in real danger. Some had already escaped and were rebuilding their lives. Some were professionals, therapists, lawyers, social workers, who wanted to understand the dynamics better so they could help their clients. I answered every email, every single one. Because I remembered how alone I had felt, how desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. If I could be that voice for even one person, it was worth it. One email particularly stayed with me. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Oregon. Her story mirrored mine so closely it was eerie. The second marriage, the financial irregularities, the isolated friends, the subtle symptoms of illness. "I read your blog," she wrote, "and I realized I'm not imagining this. He's doing exactly what Greg did to you. I'm going to hire an investigator. I'm going to protect myself. Thank you for giving me permission to trust myself." 6 months later, Jennifer wrote again. She had left her husband, taken all the evidence she and her investigator had gathered to the police. He was under investigation for fraud and attempted murder. She was safe. "You saved my life," she wrote. "I mean that literally. You saved my life." I cried when I read that email. Cried for Jennifer, for Patricia Morrison, for Ellen Chen, for all the women who hadn't made it out. And cried with gratitude that something good could come from something so terrible. I learned to trust again, slowly and carefully. Not romantic trust. That would take much longer if it ever came back. But trust in myself, in my judgment, in my ability to survive and even thrive after the worst betrayal imaginable. Because that's what Greg had taken from me. More than the money he stole or the life he tried to end. He had taken my ability to trust, my sense of safety in the world, and reclaiming that, piece by piece, day by day, became my mission. Every morning, I wake up grateful to be alive, grateful that I paid attention to that first flutter of doubt, that I didn't talk myself out of investigating, that I found Marcus Chen and Sarah and all the other people who helped save my life. Some mornings are harder than others. There are days when I wake up and the weight of what happened presses down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Days when I wonder what my life would have been like if I had never met Greg, if I had spent these years traveling alone or with friends, writing, teaching part-time, just enjoying my retirement in peace. But then I remind myself that dwelling on what-ifs is a prison of its own making. I survived. That's what matters. And my survival has meaning beyond just my own life. It has given hope and guidance to others who found themselves in similar situations. The beeping of that hospital monitor, which once signaled my vulnerability, now reminds me of my strength. I survived. I fought back. I won. And if my story can help even one other person recognize the signs, trust their instincts, and escape before it's too late, then perhaps some good can come from the nightmare I lived through. I am 63 years old now. I have been given a gift that Patricia Morrison and Ellen Chen never received. The gift of time. Time to heal, to grow, to live fully. And I intend to use every single day of it. Because I am not just a survivor of attempted murder. I am a woman who chose to save her own life, who refused to be a victim, who looked evil in the face and lived to tell the tale. And that is how I will be remembered. Not as the woman who almost died at her husband's hands, but as the woman who made sure he faced justice. The woman who gave the nurse a code and changed everything. The woman who survived.